I am Kaitlin, 36 years old. On what should have been a normal school pickup, my daughter's classmates mocked her accent, pinched their noses at her lunch, and wrote Lafufu across her toy to mark it as fake. They thought shaming her would make us shrink. What they did not realize was who her grandfather is and what family she was about to stand with. I moved here for safety, clean sidewalks, recital claps, kids who never look over their shoulders. I thought safety had an address. After the ocean crossing and the night a robbery took my husband, I needed quiet more than pride. This felt like quiet. My father's success was a distant constellation, brilliant, unreachable. Pride kept me from his orbit when what I needed was independence, not inheritance. From the first morning, perfection gleamed. Lawns shaved down, backpacks stitched with initials, cars that winked like showroom glass. Status was the local language, spoken in luxury cars, designer bags, and exclusive circles. Belonging here wasn't felt. It was displayed. This place loved mirrors more than neighbors, and mirrors don't hug back. I tried small changes first. Quiet shoes, quiet shirts, quiet everything. I tied my hair back the way they did. No bright lipstick, no big earrings. I wanted no one to stare. I drove the older car, not the newer one in the garage. Sometimes I parked 2 blocks away. Hiding felt like safety. I told myself it was smarter to stay small. We'd already paid a price once. I didn't want eyes on us again. I stopped laughing loud in the pickup line. I kept my hello soft and quick. Quiet felt like armor. Disappearing felt easier than being myself. For a while, I believed it would work. It didn't. There was a ceiling I couldn't see. It hung over us like a sign. You can walk here, but you don't belong. I felt it every day. The moms posed in matching workout sets. Their bottles matched their mats, pretty outside, shaky inside. They looked perfect, but it felt like acting, like they needed to be envied to feel okay. I saw through the shine. They leaned on cars that gleamed like mirrors. They checked each other's reflections more than faces. It was a show. The first day I walked up with my daughter, they smiled. The smiles looked practiced, not warm, polite, not real. Their eyes slid over my bag and my shoes. Then they turned back to their circle. The door stayed shut. When I spoke, their voices got tight. Their circle tilted, so we stood just outside. Not hate, no welcome. I tried to step closer. The space shifted again. We stayed on the edge. Edges cut. I brought cookies to a fundraiser. They said thanks and kept talking to each other. I was there and not there. I offered rides for a field trip. Nah, we're covered, they said. Covered never meant us. I started asking myself hard questions. Would we ever be enough for them? Could copying them buy a seat? How many sweaters would it take? How many quiet hellos? What number makes you belong? Their kids watched and learned the look. Small faces, grown-up eyes. Practice makes pattern. They stared at my daughter's lunch and her soft accent. They whispered before she spoke. The target was painted early. Even before the teasing, I heard the silence, a pause that waits for a mistake. Silence can be loud. At night, I told myself shoes don't matter. I said it out loud while I folded laundry. The doubt still pressed. You can twist yourself and still it isn't enough. You can shrink and still take too much space. That's the trick. We weren't invisible here. We were visible and unwanted. That's a different kind of hurt. Some nights she laughed in the kitchen in her pajamas. I laughed with her and watched the light on her face. Joy is brave. But a question sat in my chest. When would the crack reach her? Cracks always spread. I counted small signs like storm clouds, closed circles, tight smiles, coffee whispers. The weather was changing. I changed more things. Smaller earrings, simpler bag, no use. I tried to chat about school news. Maybe next time, someone said, already turning away. Next time never came. I asked another mom about a playdate list. Oh, it's already full, she answered. Full means closed. I watched the kids trade little toys at lunch. My daughter sat at the end of the bench, close, but not invited. I told myself we chose this place for schools and safe streets. That part was true. But there was more. Deep down, I wanted to lock out pain. I thought if we looked harmless, harm would pass by. I was wrong. The signs showed up fast. Group chats we weren't in, smiles that stopped too soon. Not one of us. I thought we'd finally found safe. We hadn't. Safe isn't a zip code. So I stopped changing my clothes for them. I started saving my voice for her. She needed my loud. But I looked at the life I tried to build by shrinking. It was smaller than she deserved. That's when I knew. The wall they kept so proudly would not stand forever. All walls face a reckoning. Ours was coming. The first hit didn't come during recess. It came during reading hour. They were on the rug, cross-legged, taking turns with a picture book. My daughter sounded out a word. One vowel slipped. One slip. One roar. A boy copied her exact sound and stretched it thin. Giggles rolled, then doubled when another child joined in. They weren't listening for the story, only the stumble. She tried to smile and keep reading, but their echoes stacked until her voice disappeared. The room went quiet, but not clean. The teacher clapped for order. The laughter stopped. The label stayed. Different, not normal. After that, a hush came every time she raised her hand. Not respect, anticipation. They waited for the next mistake. Snickers, stage whispers, the same fake accent. Speaking turned from learning into risk, entertainment for them, exhaustion for her. She never gave them the tears they wanted. She never cried in class. She folded her hands and finished the page. She refused to give them that win. At home that afternoon, her bag slid off her shoulder. She said, barely above a whisper, "Maybe I'll talk like them next time." 4 soft words that broke me open. I told her her voice was strong and beautiful. She smiled, but her eyes didn't believe me. She wanted belonging more than praise. There are scrapes you can bandage. How do you wrap a voice so it stops bleeding? This is not an accident. It's taught. But here's what those mothers didn't know as they stood in their perfect circles, teaching their children to mock what they couldn't understand. My daughter speaks 3 languages. She reads poetry in 2 of them. Her different voice carries stories of grandmothers who crossed oceans, of resilience that runs deeper than their shallow judgments could ever reach. They saw an accent where they should have seen courage. They heard difference where they should have heard strength. Their need to diminish her came from their own hollow places, the insecurity that whispers you're only safe if someone else is smaller. They passed it down like heirloom china, fragile, polished, and ultimately worthless. Their daughters learned that belonging meant exclusion, that worth was measured by what you could take from others. What a small inheritance to leave a child. What a heavy burden to carry forward. I realized then that their cruelty wasn't about my daughter at all. It was about their fear of not being enough, dressed up as superiority. They mistook our difference for weakness, never recognizing the incredible strength it takes to build a life in a new language, to carry your heritage like a gift instead of hiding it like shame. They judged completely wrong, and in doing so, revealed everything about themselves and nothing about us. That night, she mouthed words alone in bed, practicing a different mouth. I promised our walls would teach the opposite. Difference as strength. No shame lives here. And I felt the pressure building. Classroom laughter does not stay in the classroom. Next, it would follow her to lunch. The lunchroom was supposed to be neutral ground, a place where the lines of the classroom blurred, where kids traded snacks, swapped stickers, and laughed with mouths full of crumbs. But for her, it became another stage where being different was spotlighted. She sat down, carefully unzipping her lunchbox the way she always did. Inside were meals I had woken up early to prepare, tiny containers filled with food that wasn't just food. I packed them because they were healthy, but more than that, because I wanted her to feel connected to something familiar when everything else seemed foreign. The first time she opened it, a few kids twisted in their seats. One leaned back and exaggerated a sniff, pinching his nose until his face scrunched tight. "What is that?" he asked, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Just like that, the small table of chatter turned against her, their voices growing louder, piling joke after joke onto the meal she had been so excited to eat. She stared down at her food, hands frozen around her plastic fork. At first, she tried smiling, as though pretending she didn't notice would soften the blow. But when the laughter carried around her, when kids raised their eyebrows and whispered to one another as if she was some strange exhibit, her head slowly dropped. Bite after bite, she ate faster, chewing quickly, as if she could shrink into the folds of her sweatshirt and escape their sight. The kids who might have joined her in another circumstance slid their trays to the other end of the table. Nobody sat close. Isolation has a sound. It's trays sliding away. I noticed it after school, in the quiet way she carried her lunchbox back home, still zipped, still heavy. She tried to slip past me, but I saw the line in her face that only settles there when she's forcing a smile too hard. I opened the fridge later and watched her toss the untouched food straight into the trash. I asked her if she wasn't hungry. She shrugged, small shoulders weighing down under something too big for her age. Almost in a whisper, she said maybe tomorrow she would just bring chips instead. Chips, something processed and forgettable, the kind of snack that wouldn't call attention, that wouldn't stake a claim in who she was. My chest hurt hearing it. Not because of the food wasted, but because even her meals had become something to edit, something to erase, just to be allowed near others. The isolation didn't stop there. Labubu dolls traded like club passes. When she asked to hold one, smiles vanished. In an instant, the group scooped up their dolls, laughing sharply as they scrambled out of reach. A ripple of running feet, hushed cackles, and she was left again, sitting alone. Her request dismissed like it carried shame. She didn't complain. She didn't cry. She simply bent her head and finished eating the way she always did, quickly, silently, pretending not to notice the hollow space widening around her. But when she came home and sat on the couch that evening, she asked me in the softest tone if she could have a labubu too. I had no idea what she was talking about, the word shuffling awkwardly on my tongue. She repeated it, eyes glimmering with hope, but also with that fragile look of someone begging not to be told no. I promised I'd figure it out. That night, I scrolled aimlessly on my phone, typing the name over and over until videos popped up. Clusters of children showing off their collections, labeling each one like they were precious treasure. I found a seller quickly, not knowing enough to recognize the difference between authentic and counterfeit. The price seemed fair. I clicked purchase, feeling relief bloom at the thought of giving her the one thing she clearly wanted. A week later, the package arrived. I picked her up from school with the box tucked under my arm. When she climbed into the car, her hair still loose from recess, I handed it to her. She tore it open, gasping the second the toy appeared. To her, there was no difference, no flaw in the plastic or seams from careless molding. All she saw was what she had been dreaming of. She squealed, clutching it to her chest, spinning in her seat with that rare, unfiltered joy. She named it right away. Bubbles, stroking its head like it had always been hers. She carried it everywhere after that. Each step from the schoolyard to our front door, Bubbles bounced in her hand. At dinner, she lined it up on the table beside her plate. Before bed, she tucked it under her arm like a guard. What I hadn't realized until later was that she was preparing for an unveiling. She was already imagining the next school day, already rehearsing how she would bring it to the lunch table and set it down proudly. Maybe, she thought, they would notice her then. Maybe, with Bubbles at her side, she could finally be one of them. And maybe, just maybe, get asked to the sleepover she had been watching from the outside all along. At pickup, the wall was always there. You couldn't see it built from stone, but you could feel it, taller and stronger than any fence in the neighborhood. The other mothers stood together in a patchwork of pastel yoga sets, water bottles tucked under their arms, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Their voices dropped a notch when I walked past, sentences clipped, whispers traded like currency. They never said I was unwelcome. They didn't have to. The absence of invitation filled the space where normal kindness should have lived. Sometimes silence is the loudest no. I tried at first. I really did. I showed up early, smiled at faces half turned away from me, tried to compliment their sneakers or ask about the fundraiser everyone was suddenly talking about, but efforts slid off of them like water. The conversations folded back into themselves, excluding me with practiced skill. Once, I stood there for several minutes, waiting for an opening as two mothers raved about a local brunch spot. Their laughter floated between them as if I wasn't there at all. And then one of them turned, tilted her head at me, and said, "You should try the community brunch, but I'm not sure it's your thing." Not my thing, she said, as if she got to decide my things. Her tone was gentle, falsely sweet, but the undertone was sharp enough to sting. I smiled politely, but inside, the words burned. It wasn't only my status as single. They let me know in dozens of wordless ways that it was also about class, about image, about not fitting a mold they'd all agreed upon. Their cars lined the curb, polished mid-tier, luxury SUVs, badges of belonging to a certain bracket. I parked my sedan at the edge of the loop, unremarkable, but to them, the wrong symbol. They noticed details like that. They always did. My shoes, my bag, the way my hair wasn't highlighted into perfect stripes of blonde, all of it filed under "not like us." I thought perhaps I could bridge the gap through effort. I signed up for bake sales, bringing trays of cookies decorated late at night when my daughter was asleep. At meetings, I raised my hand to volunteer. I offered rides when chaperones were needed. Each time, I thought maybe connection would come from contribution, but the circle of mothers remained tight. They nodded politely, thanked me in clipped tones, then returned to their conversations that swelled with inside jokes I wasn't a part of. It didn't matter what I offered. They had already decided what space I was allowed to take, and it was always on the edge. What made it heavier was knowing my daughter was enduring her own version of this wall at school. The whispers around me at pickup echoed the laughter she faced over lunch or reading circles, both of us erased in different spaces, but in identical ways. Her for her accent, me for my absence of wealth or partner. The realization pressed hard against me. They weren't just excluding her for childish reasons. They were learning it at home. What the children acted out with teasing was a reflection of what they saw in their homes and at these sidewalks, where silence and whispers became their mother's weapons. It stung deeper when I caught sight of the flyers taped to school doors, coffee mornings, neighborhood playdates, casual dinners. I never once received a text about them. Other mothers exchanged contact lists and cartons of baked bread while my phone remained still. At first, I thought I'd missed it somehow, that maybe the email had gone to spam or my number wasn't updated. But it happened too consistently to be an accident. They shared with each other. They grew tighter bonds while leaving me and my daughter outside in plain view. The message was clear. The more we tried to blend, the more invisible we became. One afternoon, I arrived early to pick her up. The circle was already formed. I stood a few feet away, pretending to scroll through my phone. Their laughter rose in bursts, though their faces tightened slightly whenever I edged closer, as though even my presence tipped the scales in their performance. When my daughter walked out, her hair messy from playground games, I didn't linger with pleasantries. Hand in hand, we walked past the group, past their controlled smiles and filtered glances, back to our car. That was the moment the decision settled inside of me. I would stop trying to blend into something I was never meant to belong to. It was freeing in a way I hadn't expected. My energy shifted. Instead of combing through shops for neutral sweaters that I thought might help me disappear into their sameness, I spent time where it mattered, sitting across from my daughter, reminding her that her voice was strong, that her food carried a history worth caring for. It didn't shield her from the cruelty, but it drew boundaries, boundaries where she was reminded she was not wrong. They were. The mother's wall seemed thicker as weeks went by, but my perspective of it changed. Instead of pressing against it endlessly, scraping myself thin for entry, I began to see it for what it was, a desperation to keep their hierarchy intact. Their power wasn't built on kindness or connection, but on exclusion. Keeping others out made them feel secure, maybe even superior. It was flimsy when you thought of it like that. Fragile, but still painful to endure from its outside. And I began to sense something else slipping beneath the surface. This kind of rejection doesn't stay harmless forever. At some point, exclusion bends, sharpens, and turns into cruelty that no smile can disguise. Watching them link arms in their curated perfection, whispering as I passed with my daughter's hand in mine, I knew it was only a matter of time before something would snap. The wall they kept so proudly wouldn't stand unchanged forever. All walls eventually face a reckoning. The day it happened started out ordinary. She lined up with her class for lunch, clutching her tray a little tighter than the rest of them. I had packed something simple for her that morning. Nothing strange, nothing overly spiced. But it didn't matter. As soon as she opened her box, the comments began again. A boy leaned across the table, calling the food weird loud enough for everyone around to hear. A girl repeated it, pulling her sandwich toward herself like my daughter's lunch carried some invisible disease. The others laughed, in sync, without hesitation. Their laughter wasn't about the food. It was about showing each other that being cruel together was the quickest way to belong. She didn't look up. She kept her head low, her lips pressed closed, as if silence could protect her. But inside, she had been waiting for this moment. She had come prepared. From the front pocket of her backpack, she pulled Bubbles, her La Boo Boo, the toy I thought would give her a doorway into their world. She placed it carefully on the table beside her tray, the way the other girls did with their own dolls. She smiled softly, bravely, like she was making an offering they couldn't possibly refuse. For a second, they noticed. Their eyes caught on the figure, small but bright, in the middle of the table. My daughter's face lit in return, a flicker of hope blooming on her cheeks. Maybe this was the moment that would change everything. Maybe the lunch jokes would stop. Maybe she would finally be asked to sit closer, to join the weekend plans that had been whispered just beyond her reach. But that second ended as quickly as it came. They leaned toward each other, whispering behind cupped hands, their eyes darting back at her and then away. Then, in perfect rhythm, they scooped up their own toys, clutching them to their chests, and walked away from the table, laughing. The sound burned sharper than anything before. They didn't have to say it aloud. Their actions were enough. She was unwelcome even in this, even holding the symbol they prized most. One girl lingered. She paused in front of my daughter, lips curved in what looked like kindness. She asked if she could hold Bubbles. My daughter, eager for connection, handed it over. Her eyes softened, maybe thinking at last she had found someone willing to bridge the gap. But within seconds, the girl turned and ran straight back to the group. A huddle formed, backs turned to my daughter as the sounds of muffled giggles erupted again. Minutes later, the girl marched back, grinning, Bubbles still in her hand. She set it down on the table carelessly. Scrawled across its face in black marker were 5 letters: Lafufu. My daughter couldn't make sense of the word at first. She stared at it, mouthing the letters in silence, confused more than anything. She didn't know the word. She didn't need to. Their smirks translated it. The intent didn't need translation. They had erased the name she had given her toy, the identity she had tied to it, and replaced it with something meant to sting. Bubbles wasn't Bubbles anymore. It had become a cruel joke, a weapon fashioned out of what she loved. She didn't cry while they hovered nearby, watching for her reaction. She wouldn't give them that glance of satisfaction. She sat down on the bench, straight-backed but quiet, and slid the toy back into her backpack. Her food remained untouched, her smile vanished. She lowered her head and waited until the bell rang, determined not to show the weight of it while anyone else could see. Later, at home, I discovered the truth. She had tossed her bag onto the kitchen floor, and when I lifted it hours later, I found everything crumpled inside, her lunch still sealed in its container, barely touched. And beneath, a heavy textbook, flattened and bent, lay Bubbles. The small doll pressed awkwardly against notebooks, marker ink bleeding across its head where the word Lafufu glared up at me. I froze, staring at it, my chest seizing from what I was holding. For weeks, I had endured the looks, the whispers, the mothers comparing themselves in front of cars and disguising exclusion with powder-soft smiles. I had swallowed every sting in silence, telling myself I could absorb it if it meant she was spared. But seeing that toy, her treasure, her piece of hope, defaced and discarded like garbage, sliced deeper than anything I had carried yet. It shattered something, not in her, in me, because I knew the full pain wasn't written in marker or in uneaten lunches. It was carved in the way she no longer asked for playdates, the way she dropped her eyes on the sidewalk at pickup, the way she practiced sounding out words at night with her bedroom door closed so no one but me would hear. Watching her erase pieces of herself to fit into a mold that would never hold her felt like drowning in silence. And now they had taken even the one small joy she clung to, smearing it with laughter disguised as ink. That night, as she slept curled around her pillow, her bag hung limp on the chair nearby. I sat staring at it, bubbles crushed under notebooks, the marker scrawling at me like a dare. I felt it then, the shift I'd been holding back. The soft patience I had been trying to sustain cracked open, and in its place settled something harder, sharper, resolve. If I couldn't protect her by standing still, then I would protect her by moving. The question was how. One child against a wall of children, one mother against a sea of mothers. Mockery that had been allowed so long it felt woven into the day-to-day. Who would believe me if I said a word turned into a wound deep enough to scar? What could possibly be strong enough to unearth the cruelty people had learned to disguise as normal? These questions circled me, demanding I find an answer. Independence had been my armor. I built a life on not asking my father for anything. But that night, I set pride down and called my father. I reached for the phone. My hand hovered, not out of doubt, but because I understood what it meant. One call could shift everything. It could turn silence into noise. It could pierce through the wall they had built and force it to crack. For weeks, I had let the weight bear down on me in quiet endurance. But this time, I chose otherwise. This time, I chose action. And as I dialed, I didn't yet know how the pieces would fall. I only knew that the ending to our silence had just begun. I pressed call, and when he answered, I didn't need to explain every detail. He heard my voice crack, and that was enough. He had always been remote, far away behind layers of business meetings, headlines, and stock tickers. But to him, my daughter was different. She was the only grandchild, the only piece of family his success could never buy. I told him about the laughter, the isolation, the toy that had been ruined with ink. I expected sympathy, maybe even a promise to speak to me more often. What I didn't expect was action. Within 2 days, he told me firmly not to worry, that he would take care of it. He had arranged something, though he didn't say what. Then it happened. Pickup froze mid-chatter. You heard it before you saw it. The engine, low and certain. Not sneakers, not small talk. Power. Heads lifted, bodies stilled. This was the moment the street changed sides. Heads turned together as a black luxury sedan rolled up the drive. Slow, deliberate, as if the pavement existed only for its wheels. Behind it came a much larger truck, polished black, a toy company's logo blazing in bold white across the side. On the roof, a towering replica of the big-eared, wide-eyed monster collectible rode like a beacon. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, squeals, nervous excitement. Children tugged on their mother's sleeves, faces lit with shock and greed. "It's for us," the girls shouted, hugging their toys close as if they'd summoned this spectacle with their sleepover plans. The mothers preened, exchanging smug glances, standing taller as if their status had miraculously drawn this show of generosity. They tilted their heads and whispered about their connections. Already convinced, the event outside the school gates had been orchestrated to celebrate them. My daughter stepped out of the building, her head dipped low, backpack hanging awkwardly on one shoulder. She noticed the commotion, but she didn't stop to look. Experience had already taught her that celebrations like this never included her. She waited by the curb, hugging her arms as the sound of laughter floated past her. She didn't think for a second the moment was hers. Then, the driver of the Rolls-Royce stepped out first, pulling open the heavy door with a crisp efficiency. From inside emerged the figure of my father, sharp in his suit, posture carved from years of commanding rooms far louder than this one. He scanned the crowd once, swiftly, his eyes moving past the mothers, past their children, until they landed on her. She froze. For a heartbeat, her confusion overrode everything. Then recognition sparked in her, and she let go of her backpack, running straight into his arms. He bent down, a labubu in hand, lifting her high into the air, spinning her once in a circle that sent her giggling in a way I hadn't heard in weeks. The crowd quieted, and in the hush, realization spread. It wasn't for them. It never was. It wasn't for their daughters or their polished families. It was for her, the girl they had pushed away, the child whose lunch, accent, and toy they had turned into weapons. And as the truth settled, their faces stiffened. In the glint of his car, the gloss of the branded truck, their curated world looked smaller. Their cars, which had once seemed status symbols, were revealed as mid-tier. Their handbags, once flaunted as luxury, now looked flimsy against the weight of heritage and wealth that had stood quietly right beside them all along. The daughters stood huddled, eyes wide, toys clutched, in awkward silence. They watched as the back of the truck opened slowly, revealing a glass case lined with shelves of pristine monster dolls, colors and styles they had never seen before, each one glowing like treasure. My father leaned forward, telling my daughter he had heard she loved these toys, and he wanted her to have something special. His voice carried just enough for the mothers to hear, though none of them dared step closer now. She listened, beaming, holding his hand tightly, a softness returning to her that had been chipped away over the past weeks. Then, with a pause that made the air thick, he crouched to her level. "You can't open all of these alone," he said. "Choose 2 friends to invite, 10 boxes each." The line of girls in front of her seemed to stiffen together, eyes darting, each of them hoping, pleading without words, that she would choose them. But their hopes wilted quickly. None of the mean girls could bring themselves to meet her eyes. Their stares burned holes in the pavement instead, the shame heavy in their small frames. She scanned the line patiently, unhurried, holding her grandfather's hand. Then she lifted her chin and pointed, not at the ones who had mocked her food, her voice, her toy, but at 2 quieter girls who had always shown kindness. The girls whose small gestures had gone unnoticed by the louder crowd. They stepped forward trembling, their faces breaking into shocked smiles as he guided them toward the glass case. My daughter watched, steady and calm, as Bubbles remained tucked under her arm. Only this time, no one dared laugh. The laughter had turned into silence, and the silence belonged to her. That afternoon, as I watched my daughter choose kindness over revenge, selecting the 2 girls who had shown her grace instead of the ones who had caused her pain, I finally understood what I had been witnessing all along. The mothers who had stood in their perfect circles now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes as the truth settled over the schoolyard like a heavy blanket. Their daughters, the ones who had mocked her food, her voice, her toy, stood frozen, unable to meet anyone's gaze as my daughter's quiet grace exposed their cruelty for what it truly was. They had seen my daughter's accent and missed the courage it took to speak 3 languages. They had wrinkled their noses at her lunch and missed the stories of grandmothers who crossed oceans. They had dismissed her fake toy and missed the resilience that runs deeper than their shallow judgments could ever reach. Now, watching their own children learn what it meant to be left out, to be the ones not chosen, the mothers' faces flushed, with a shame they couldn't hide behind their designer sunglasses. Their need to diminish her had never been about her at all. It came from their own hollow places, the insecurity that whispers, "You're only safe if someone else is smaller." They had passed it down like heirloom china, fragile, polished, and ultimately worthless. Their daughters learned that belonging meant exclusion, that worth was measured by what you could take from others. What a small inheritance to leave a child. And now, as those same daughters stood empty-handed while kindness was rewarded, the mothers finally tasted the bitter fruit of what they had sown. But here's what they discovered too late. They had judged completely wrong. They mistook our difference for weakness, never recognizing that my daughter carried her heritage like a gift instead of hiding it like shame. Their cruelty wasn't about my daughter. It was about their fear of not being enough, dressed up as superiority. The mothers who had whispered and excluded now stood silent, their designer armor cracked. Their daughters, who had laughed so easily at someone else's pain, now knew what it felt like to be the ones left standing alone. In that moment of reckoning, something shifted. Not just for us, but for them. The cruel children learned that actions have consequences. The mothers learned that the walls they built to keep others out had trapped their own children inside small, brittle worlds. My daughter learned something different. She learned that true power isn't in tearing others down, it's in lifting others up. She learned that belonging isn't something you beg for or buy with conformity. It's something you create through kindness, something you claim by refusing to shrink. And now, as the silence belonged to her and laughter belonged to the two friends she chose with such grace, I realized that belonging was never about neutral clothes or quiet smiles. It was never about hiding parts of ourselves to fit into spaces too small to hold us. True belonging came the moment my daughter was finally seen as she was, not as someone to erase, but as someone to celebrate. The wall they kept so proudly had finally faced its reckoning. When it crumbled, it revealed something they had always feared, that their power was built on nothing but the willingness of others to stay small. And in its crumbling, we found something far more valuable than their approval. We found ourselves. Belonging isn't borrowed, it's claimed. If you're a parent and this hit home, tap like, share with one parent, and subscribe so more children are seen, welcomed, and safe.